The TEFL Commute, Season 8, Episode 4, in which Ceri and I chat about all things irregular. Let's get started. Hi, Ceri.
Hi, Lindsay. How are you doing?
Fine, thanks. How are you?
Very well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
I know we haven't had you on the show for a while. It's good to be co-hosting with you.
Hey, what have you done with Shaun?
Oh, he's away. I think he's training somewhere, or he's doing some kind of online training. He's deep in the online world of teacher training and cannot make it this episode. Anyway, hello everybody and welcome. This is an episode of the TEFL Commute. We are a podcast for language teachers that's not about language teaching, but the topic always seems to come up. I'm your host, Lindsay Kleinfield.
And I'm Ceri Jones.
And today we're going to be talking about, and I'm sure that language teaching will come up quite a lot, because the topic we took today was kind of like, seems like a strange one, but it's very much a part of our work, I think, as language teachers. That's the term irregular. I think we all had in mind one thing we wanted to talk about. When an English teacher hears the word irregular, there's always one place where our brains automatically go, and that's probably the irregular verb list. But we wanted to approach irregular, like all different aspects of irregular and our profession of language teaching. I wanted to start off with, Ceri, by asking you a question. Is English a very irregular language? And if so, in what ways?
Okay, so you're totally right with the irregular verbs collocation. If you Google irregular and English, you only get the irregular verbs for pages and pages. But it isn't, of course, the only irregular thing about the English language. I'd say that number 2 that comes up on the list is spelling.
And of course,
your sort of phonetic sound spelling association thing. And it actually comes up with a lot of stuff on spelling bees. And obviously the spelling competitions, the harder they get, the more irregular the spelling gets as well. So that is definitely, I would say English is very irregular from that point of view.
Exactly. I actually remember, I think we spoke about this once on an episode on alphabet. I did read somewhere that, in fact, a lot of words, or a great majority of the a majority of the words, let's say, in English are not that irregular. But the problem is a lot of the very frequent words are irregular. So it gives us an impression that, or it certainly gives us a feeling that things are the rules, the spelling sound things do not tally up as nicely as, for example, Spanish or other Romance languages. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it's the students particularly, I think, who think of it as irregular. I think if you learn to read in a more organic way, or if it's the first language that you learn to read, it's very much to do with sight words, so that you those really frequent ones that are irregular spelling wise, so the one you just learn them as a shape, don't you? Sort of, and a lot of students coming from a background like, you say, Spanish or Italian, are expecting to be able to spell it out letter by letter.
That's right. And so they learn it as a shape and they get it mixed up. Like, I'm thinking of the famous words like what, the WH, which is a sort of a regular thing, but they'll learn the shape, but they mix up. So they put WAHT is a frequent one I see with beginner learners. So they're not spelling out the sounds. They're trying to remember that shape.
I had a teacher at school, she was old at the time, so we're talking about a teacher who would have trained as an English teacher a long, long time ago, and she used to insist on pronouncing the H. She said it wasn't what, it was what. And
what?
And when and where.
Wow, wonderful.
Maybe we could do that with us.
Yes. What? Of course, so verbs, spelling. I think the other thing is, and I often find this when I'm doing language awareness sessions with teachers. We often have the go-tos like irregular verbs. That's the main thing. Of course, we do have other word classes that have their irregularities. The second most popular one would be probably irregular nouns in their plural form, right? Or person, people, man, men, woman, women, child, children.
Yeah, nice. And the kind of the Latin endings and the Greek endings as well that have kind of stayed in the language.
Yeah. And
when do you use those?
Yes, exactly. The mouse, mice, or the things like that. Then we also have irregular adjectives. Also, then every time I mention that, people are like, oh, of course, yeah, there are irregular adjectives. You know, you're sort of good, better, best, bad, worse, worst, etc. Far, further, and so on.
Yeah, and then there's other little patterns that you could say the kind of the regularity of the ly ending being an adverb ending, for example, and the confusion when actually it's an adjective ending. So you have something like friendly or lonely, and
exactly. Or when you have something like you something is hard, but you don't work hardly.
Yeah.
You work hard, yes.
Yeah. So then you've got your irregular adverbs as well, then, which don't follow that rule. So I guess it's kind of taking irregular to mean not following the main rule, like the majority rule. No?
Exactly. And one of the things I was wondering, is this like, well, within English, it seems to be, these are particularly within certain word classes. Like in English, we don't have irregular prepositions, which is a much smaller set, or irregular conjunctions, because there's not enough really to create a rule. But we were talking about before, you said in other languages you may have irregularities in other word classes, i.e. prepositions, conjunctions, or things like that.
Yeah, I was thinking of Spanish. For me, there's the conjugation of the preposition con. And I think it's the only one that's conjugated, isn't it? So it means with. And so if you say with me, then you have to create the conmigo. And that.
Oh, right. You don't say con me.
Yeah, that
thing
at the end only comes with con, as far as I know.
Ah, okay. And you don't say sinmigo.
No.
Like without me is not.
Although I think I have in the past done that. Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to get later on to how first and second language speakers overgeneralize rules or so on when coming to irregulars. What about are there other things in terms of like irregular word forms which are, I suppose some must be in flux, aren't they? Like, is any time that a rule is being broken, does that mean it becomes irregular?
Is it irregular, and how long does it take for it to become regular? So it's the classic kind of few disappearing from the language idea, isn't it? That now it's becoming more and more frequent to see less being used rather than fewer.
Explain that to me then again. So less and few. Give me some examples where you see this being changed.
Okay, so it would be less and fewer, of course, wouldn't it? So there are fewer and fewer people, and it's very common you get less and less people. And in fact, it's starting to sound almost more natural to use less, but then that would be breaking the countable uncountable rule. So you would say that was an irregularity.
Does that become the irregularity that just is sort of the norm? Ah, interesting.
Does it become a new rule, which is that there's this irregularity in the, or is it just going to become one that we can use with countable and uncountable alike, and so the irregularity just completely disappears at that point?
Yes, I mean, I think what we're getting very close to, I think, the elephant in the room whenever we talk about irregular, which is going to be, because I keep wanting to go there, and I think we're about to go there, which is, of course, the irregular verbs, of which I had no idea so much had been written and so much research had been done going back decades. So I suggest we take a very short break, and when we come back, let's delve into the infamous irregular verb list in English. Sound good?
That sounds good to me.
Okay, so in the first part of this of our podcast today on in irregular, we looked at whether or not English could be considered an irregular language. We looked at like spelling, sound and spelling things are not always regular. We looked at that it's not only verbs but other word classes like nouns and adjectives can be also considered irregular. And we compared it a little bit to other languages. One that we both know, Spanish, and then how maybe when rules change, do things just go from being wrong to just being an irregular exception. But the big thing, of course, is the irregular verb list. Well, I've been doing some research on this, and first of all, Ceri, how many verbs are in that irregular verb list, do you think?
Oh, I have no idea. That's a great question. I know the ones in the back of the course books tend to be around between 25 and 40 or something, but a full list, I bet it's much longer.
It is much longer, but it's not as long as one might think. Approximately, according to several sources I've read, there are around 180 irregular verb forms. But what's interesting about all these sources is they keep hedging, saying around 180, because some things, of course, are disappearing. And that's what I wanted to delve in a little bit. So let's just define our terms. The irregular verb is a verb that is not formed by adding the affix or the inflection ed. So a regular past tense and past participle of a verb is used by making an ed. For example, open, opened, opened. But an irregular verb could be something like make, made, made, or fly, flew, flown. And apparently there are around 180 of these. However, they don't, and they're the most frequently at the back of a course book, on a school's bookmark, on the wall of an English language classroom, but they rarely have all 180 ones because some of them are very rare. But the thing is that they include some of the most frequent words. So, for example, go, yes, make, do, have, be, yeah. Trying to think of what the other ones of the most frequent ones. Eat, see. That would be another one, wouldn't it?
Yep.
The fact of that some of our most common verbs in English are irregular is what makes this such a big deal for students to have to learn, because you can't kind of escape it. I think for some of the spelling stuff you can escape for a while. No, maybe not some of the very frequent words, but let's say your irregular adjectives, maybe you can get away with it. No, probably not. I don't know.
I would argue that as an A1 student, A2 as well, beginning of A2 student, you can get away with the ed ending. And those irregular verbs are massively overvalued, actually. That's just throwing that out there. I'm quite happy if my beginners...
repeat. You're happy if your beginners... What?
To use an ed ending on an irregular verb to get their message across.
Controversial statement.
That's controversial.
Okay, all right. I presume you're basing this on the fact that children, when they're learning a language, will also make that mistake as part of their interlanguage development. So like a child will say maked, won't they?
Exactly. I mean, I think because it's part of the interlanguage and it's just something that is understood, generally speaking, although I think a lot of beginner students may just avoid the past and just throw in an infinitive. But if they're actually putting an ed ending on at the end as well, then they're obviously starting to process the whole idea of a past inflection. So I think, hey, great, power to your processing.
Well, I think this is also what's really interesting. One of the most famous books. Well, maybe not famous. A famous book, let's say, that looked at language and discussed a lot of about regular and irregular verbs in English was Steven Pinker's Words and Rules. And what he says is that there are hold on a second, I've got notes on this here, is that people learning the language will apply the rules first, but the other stuff, the irregulars, have to be memorized. Now, I might be getting this kind of wrong. So he says that irregular verbs are the result of words being increasingly distorted over time and until the rule governing their use became lost. So that they maybe did follow the rule, but they got more and more distorted. And then so those words have to be learned apart as a block. So like how children learn, they will learn the pattern or the rule first, but the other stuff has to be learned as a block of rules of words.
I think that might be worth turning on its head, because I would say that for me, children do not learn it as a block of words, or they don't learn a rule. They are just exposed to a load of verbs in the past, whether it's in parent talk or whatever, because I think they pick the past up before they start schooling formally. So basically they're picking it out from exposure. And
exactly. Go on.
And so I don't think they ever kind of have the rule is subconscious, isn't it? I guess it's the same thing, but they wouldn't be able to verbalize that rule for you. They'd just go around putting an ED on.
Well, according to Pinker in this book, he sort of says that the rules of language appear to be innate, but irregularities must rely on a different part of thinking.
Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, he says that the English language of the 180 irregular verb forms, and again, people have maybe criticized this, says which simply must be memorized. With regular verbs, humans seem to apply the rules instinctively. He talks about a child encountering an unfamiliar word such as wug. W-U-G, an invented word. The child would automatically give the past tense as wugged. So he says the two parts of the mind and two different types of thinking are utilized. So some parts are just applying the rule, and other parts is retrieving it from the exposure, so that slowly that retrieval becomes part of the natural thing. I'm not sure. I didn't read any criticisms of this one, but I'm sure there have been. But I think there is this idea that when kids are learning a first language, they overcompensate and add ed to things. Just like you were saying, your beginning students, you are okay with them making make it or buy it at the beginning, because eventually they'll start getting it. Yeah.
And also, like as parents, we just correct, don't we?
We reformulate.
We do. We basically what kids are getting is reformulation of that, so kind of exposure to the irregular form, and they won't pick it up straight away. And I guess beginner students are the same. We're going to be reformulating, and they're going to keep going with their rule without thinking about it if they're producing it whilst they're speaking, even writing.
Well, apparently, I mean, I think lots of this stuff in words and rules was also a bit of an argument about the infamous black box, Chomsky's black box, which, sort of where the language is created in the brain, right?
Yeah.
And the black box cannot explain why irregular verbs stay. I think I'm grossly simplifying this, and maybe I'm going out of my depth. But according to Pinker, he says that's because I think he's sort of saying the black box could still be there, but there are two things going on inside. One is the rules creation and generation, and the other is changing that as you realize like that there are these irregularities that are happening.
I mean, it's also that pattern recognition, isn't it?
Yes.
We take a metaphor from data crunching. It's just the more data you get, then you start picking out the patterns, and so maybe a pattern which is just more frequent is an ed ending. But then as those top irregular verbs are repeated over and over and over, we said things like, went, had, did, made. The exposure on those is going to be pretty high as well. So that kind of spotting frequent patterns, which again is another theory as to how our brains process language. Then if that pattern is frequent enough, then it does become automatic, and it's something that the brain can just retrieve as a chunk, as it were.
And that's exactly what I think Pinker was getting at. I think the other thing, when we said about how a child, when encountering, and the WUG test has been done several times on like, what, if you wug the bear, what did you do yesterday with the bear? I wugged it.
Yeah.
So, but what's interesting is when you think of any new verbs coming into the language in English, how they automatically become regular past tense verbs. So, for example, like if you Google something, yesterday I Googled it.
Yeah.
I didn't giggle it, or Google as the same thing. If I was thinking of other new verbs, things like dox. If you expose someone's address and real name online and where they live and stuff, doxing someone, you doxed them. XXED. I don't know other ones. Like if
it's interesting that the spelling rules there as well are going on, no? Because you've just doubled the final consonant.
Doubled the
there.
X. Yeah. Yes. And the same thing with like someone, if you lull, like if you laugh out loud, I've heard people say, yeah, I lulled about that.
Yeah.
I mean, so I can already see that rule, since it gets applied, we don't tend to see many irregular
it
verbs.
happens across other languages as well, because I'm thinking about exactly lol being taken into, again, having to take Spanish as my example, but it would be loleado. And, so you just add that regular.
Lolear.
Exactly. So you make lol. First of all, it has to be a verb form. And then from that verb form, you can create the regular past form. And so that's, so it's something that happens across languages, obviously, when we're bringing in, or maybe like verbalizing a noun, or what's the verb for that? Verbizing? You do when you...
Oh, right. You nominalize.
Verbify? It's like...
Verbify. Okay, let's go with verbify. Here, I've got another question. This relates exactly, and our listeners can do this as well. I'm going to tell you some verbs. I want you to tell me the past form. Okay, just the past form. All right. Okay, ready? Grip. Gripped. Okay, starve.
Starved.
Starve, like not eat.
Starved.
Yes. Smoke.
Smoked.
Flow, as in the river flows.
Flowed.
Climb.
Climbed. I'm waiting for the trick.
Okay. The trick is that all of these were irregular in the past. And this is part of a really interesting study that I came across done recently I'll tell you at the end, because I'm looking at the page of this table, which looks at how what they posit, and this is great news for students, is that they posit that the regular verb list has slowly been shrinking over time. And that the less frequent the verb was, the more likely it would slowly glide towards being regular. So wonderful. All of those verbs that I said to you used to be irregular. Unfortunately, I don't have the past tense forms. I couldn't find those. So the past tense of starve might have just been starve or stove. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Swallow might have been swallow in the past tense. Other examples would have been wield, shove, prescribe, wreak, row, etc.
Right.
And they have a whole bunch of these that they say over time they became regular, and they say they say it's continuing now. So they say, for example, the latest example that they observe being in flux right now is the word wed, as in like to marry someone, to wed someone.
Oh yeah.
So if you were putting the past part, traditionally it should be wed.
Okay.
But we're hearing now wedded.
Yeah.
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 They were wedded. I was wedded in June or whatever. Yeah. The minister wedded them on a beautiful spring day. And they say that is becoming increasingly regular. It's a regular form.
Also, that one kind of rings as a past participle used as an adjective to me more than used as a verb. I don't think I would ever use the verb to wed, but definitely like wedded bliss. Wouldn't it?
Yep.
You wouldn't say wed bliss.
Okay, so here's some ones that they say could be up for it. Slink, like if you're moving around,
slink.
Like slinked is what it's becoming, but it should be slink, slank, slunk.
Yeah.
But it sounds weird to say he slank through the door. You might say he slinked through the door.
Definitely.
Wring, as what you do with your hands when your hands are wet, or with a towel.
I wonder whether this is just like one of those kind of British American things, but so Britain, we have the get, got, but gotten, is that an older form that has stayed in American English and been dropped in British English? Is that what happened?
It could be, yes. I think that would make sense if you think of other pronunciation things and other elements of English which we think of as American, but in fact we're closer to whatever Pilgrim era English.
Taken over and didn't evolve in the same way in the States or in Canada as they did in the UK, I guess.
So anyway, so that seems to be that's a bit of good news for our students. If you hang on for another 400 years, maybe some of the things like sink, shoot, maybe our verb list will go down from 180 to just 80, and you can fit it on half a page or on half of a bookmark. So that's good. Another interesting thing before we move off of the verb ones was I want to ask you another question, because there was another interesting study here of I'm going to tell you some verbs. I want you to tell me the past tense.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay. Begin.
Began. Do you want
Drink.
drank?
Yeah. Give me all three.
Okay.
Yeah.
Began, begun.
Ring.
Ring, rang, rung.
Sing.
Sang, sung.
Spring.
Sprang, sprung.
Okay. So the thing is this is a collection of verbs. There are only 9 of them.
Uh-huh.
Which all follow the same pattern. The past tense form is a, and the past participle is you, or a, right? Begin, began, begun. But they say that in standard English today, there is fluctuation between these past forms, where people say, is it like I shrank the kids or I shrunk the kids?
Yeah.
You know that film, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
Yeah.
But that's incorrect. It should be I shrank the kids, but it's I shrunk the kids. Is it I sang or I sung? Is it? I mean, begin is different. That one people, but swam or swum, stink or stank or stunk, sing or sang or sung. So it was really interesting that this is another more recent study, Cambridge study, that looked at how. There's consensus about what constitutes correct past tense, but things begin to change, and non-standard forms begin to kind of come back into it.
I imagine it might be a little bit along with a lot of those. I know that my kids use kind of overuse the past participle, as it were, instead of the simple past definite. And I wonder if it's a little bit like the if I were, if I was, and it'll become something which will be totally acceptable, however, in formal writing, or if you're being a little bit, nitpicky.
I think it is that.
You'd prefer it to be the other form. I wonder if that'll happen.
Yes, I'm not sure. I mean, I think I'm going to read you a sentence. I've been trying to read this out in my mind. Just maybe if I read out, might make more sense. The incorrect, like to say I shrunk the kids as a past tense, they said some of these seem to be more quote unquote natural than the standard English counterpart shrank or drank. Mm-hmm. Because they conform, all right, get ready here, they conform to the system-defining structural proprieties of English, easing the cognitive load of the language learner and language user. So I think they're kind of saying they conform to another rule. Yeah. But the question is not why speakers use drink, drunk, drunk rather than drink, drank, drunk.
Yeah.
But what motivated grammarians to prescribe distinct forms for past and past participle in the standard, so that they say there was a correction was made by the grammarians which didn't conform to, in fact, a natural use.
So it was kind of when the rules were being set and written down, as it were, which happened a lot with spellings as well. There was a lot more freedom, wasn't there, with spelling?
Would have happened with our if I was, if I were. Yeah. The natural thing was what was perhaps happening before, and then there was an effort to kind of say, no, the correct way of saying it is this. But anyway.
Is that kind of prescriptive grammar kind of...
Those damn prescriptivists, they did it again. All right. What do you think, Ceri? I think we've gone into the weeds on the irregular verbs. Shall we have another break and then come back and talk how this relates to teaching? Irregular verbs are so easy to learn. One thing you had, you never forget that. Irregular verbs are so easy to learn. One thing you had, you never forget that. What was that?
Oh, well, that was a little irregular verb song. And if you go on YouTube, you will find a host of irregular verb songs. Personally, I've never used them, but I can see that maybe some teachers would like them.
I haven't either, but I can understand why YouTube would be just chock full of irregular verb songs. And I'm sure we have colleagues of ours in the writing business who've probably written their fair share of irregular verb songs as well. I mean, because it is like the uber thing that no English teacher can ever escape having to teach this, right? I mean, it's just sooner or later, the student's going to have to learn it.
And they chant it as well, don't they? I mean, a lot of students who've learnt it maybe before you become their teacher, they will have learnt it from somewhere else, and it's like a little mantra almost.
It is a little mantra, and what I always find interesting about that is how the mantra always goes in threes, even if you've only supposedly learnt the past tense. So, like, you always do, like, put,
yeah,
or swim, even if you're like, well, we're not doing present perfect, so you're not really supposed to know these. They're just like, okay, swim, or whatever, begin, began, begun, come, came, come, etc. They always seem to learn it in threes.
Yes, because if they come to you having already learnt them, then basically you can't avoid it, can you? If they've come to you without having had any exposure to the list, then you can just do the past.
Yes.
Like
I'm trying to think if I ever met someone who has no exposure to the list. I mostly teach teenagers and adults, so I'd have to say no. Well, maybe with some of the older adults, but even then, they kind of still seem to like be able to recite make, made,
I had a group of older adults who had studied French in school because of their age, and they were in school under Franco, so French was the language that was taught, and they had no exposure to the list, which was wonderful because it was just like,
wow.
We could go at it whatever way we wanted, and they were beginners, and so we just started with a little set of irregular verbs, and
yeah.
So I could have this little experiment with them about what you do if you actually teach them the irregular forms first and then tell them there's a regular form as well. And then it was like, wow, suddenly you've opened up this box of verbs.
Totally. Well, this is a parenthesis that we could have touched on before, and both of us as materials writers, we've both written elementary books, and you have to get to that point where you say, okay, past tense, what are we going to do first? Are we going to do regular and then the irregulars? Or are we going to do regular and irregular first? And I'm of the feeling now that you do teach first the very common irregular ones. So you teach like go, see, eat, do, make.
I've had arguments about this until very, very recent about the frequency and the generative, value of the most frequent irregulars. And I think, if you're teaching an A1 class, if you give them went, did, had, they can tell you almost anything with the right vocabulary about their weekend.
Yeah, saw, ate. Yeah,
exactly.
Went, did, see, saw, ate.
Yeah, that's it. Don't give them anything else.
A whole weekend is right there.
Yeah,
yep.
exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We can actually talk about the past for lessons on end with just those 5 verbs. But it's like, oh no, you have to show them the regular first, or they won't get it. And you go, But anyway, I didn't.
Well, maybe we're accessing different parts of their brain to bring it back to Pinker. Sort of like, do we go first for the rules generating part of the brain and teach them the rule, or do we go for like time for you to store this little bit of useful language in your retrieval part? And so on. Okay, favorite activities for teaching the irregulars? There's no trick, is there, really? I gave up on trying to find a trick. You can group them a bit, so you can't say like there's a seesaw, like there's the ones that have the same like make, made.
Yeah.
And then there's like this put and shut. But I don't know.
You can kind of go for the whole pronunciation side of things as well.
Buy, pot, like teach, taught.
The ought, so then they can have a whole group of them and see how many of them go into the ought.
But then I worry that they mix buy and bring then, right? So I don't know. There's post.
Yeah, I mix buy and bring in the past. I'm going to say I think it's a Welsh thing. Yeah. So I very often bought something when I actually brought it, and it's that's a little bit of a
well, I can see that
slip.
happening as well. Yep. I don't know. I like my favorite activity, but again, it's just a rote kind of like memorizing activity is the irregular verb tennis. This is from Mary Wynne Villuqui's Grammar Games, where like I call out the past form, like did, you call out the past participle done, and then I have to bat it back to you with the present form.
Yeah,
do.
I remember you mentioning that in a games episode as well, I think. So
Yes, that still is one of my favorite ones. But
I like the paper, rock, scissors or whatever. What do you call that, Lindsay?
Paper, rock, scissors.
That's what you.
For what?
Yeah, is that what you call it as well? Because
Yeah.
Yep.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah, that's it.
Rock,
It's
paper, scissors.
like
Yeah.
order of it changes, doesn't it? People order it differently. They get very heated about what the right order should be. But anyway,
how does that work with irregulars?
It's the same as the tennis, really. Whoever wins says the infinitive, and the partner has to say the past. That's all it is. It just trips it off and makes it a little bit more dynamic, I guess.
I guess, yes. And I think there's also there's the chanting it back. There's kind of all the drilling form. Tends to be with the corrections, like went gone yesterday. I don't know, that kind of things. Trying to think if there's any other favorite activities for teaching this. I'm sure our listeners must have their go-to activities.
Yeah.
But it's certainly weird that it's always in groups of 3. Chants tend to work, and then sort of like drilling activities.
Is it that listing thing, where we like to group things in 3? So like telephone numbers and that whole intonation thing about a list, and you group them in 3.
Yes.
At the end. So maybe there's something kind of
something about there.
Comforting about.
And I think there is something comforting for students as well, in the sense that it is. Like, it is a thing to memorize. It's a list. Like, it's something that's like, okay, I just need to learn this by rote. There's no other way. It's not sort of like, there's not a lot of processing you have to do.
And there's not a lot of rote learning in English, is there? So
it's not like the conjugating in other languages or cases in other languages. This is the one area where a lot of students are like, oh, this Friday I have a test on the irregular verb list. It means that they can approach that test like they would approach any other subject domain studying. It's just like, I just memorize.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Whereas the frustrating thing of like, I can't memorize for a reading exam, or I can memorize for vocabulary lists, and in grammar, it's for the irregular verb list.
Yep. Totally.
Interesting. Well, I think we're coming almost to the end. Let's have one last tiny break, and then let's widen our focus to other kinds of irregular in language teaching. All right. I think we've done enough on irregular words, verbs, sounds, spellings, all kinds of stuff like that. We really went deep into it. But you had some notes, Ceri, that you were showing me of other ways that we could interpret irregular in language teaching.
Okay, so first thing I was thinking of was that whole idea of a regular job,
Yes. Okay, so English teaching,
Very often, English language teaching is just not a regular job, is it? How many times have you had to explain what you do to someone and they really don't understand?
Exactly. Well, I think there are two things here. There's the English teacher who works in a state school system and only in the state school system, and that might be just a regular teaching job. But even those teachers will often do the other side of English teaching, which if you're working in the private sector is all you do, which means a balance between like after school classes, morning classes, private classes, online teaching, whatever, classes at irregular hours, isn't it, really?
I think if you're thinking of the classic private language school teaching timetable, that to a lot of people is pretty irregular anyway, isn't it? It's because it's at the time when other people aren't working. So your working hours
so you have your like
out of sync a little
breakfast. Bit. Yeah, your working hours like breakfast time, lunch time, and then after work time. So I always remembered when I was working those kind of typical English teaching hours. Let's say like 7 to 9, 12:30 to 3, and then maybe after school classes started at 4 or 4:30 until 9 or 10 at night. It was always fine to do shopping or go to the bank or go to the post office because I didn't have any classes at those kind of main working times of day. That's when everyone was working.
But it's exhausting. I mean, we all
completely.
we
Yes.
get into the rhythm of it, obviously, and everyone kind of builds their lives around those. But it's exhausting. It's not good for you in the long run as well. It's like, like working like a fireman or a first responder, it's not
Exactly.
that bad, because we are tied to a schedule of some sort, but it's just one that throws you all over the place during the day.
And even teachers who have like the nice plum, let's say, a good public school job or a good university job, often they find that they are supplementing their income by doing that other kind of teaching as well. So they may have some business English classes, or they may teach in like a friend's private academy, or they may have some private classes for some students to help them prepare for an exam. So there is that sort of irregular hours.
Teaching online, and your online classes could be at any time of day as well. So that kind of throws the whole regularity. But I guess the thing is that more and more people are working those kind of irregular hours, if we're kind of thinking of the whole gig economy and 24/7 work and maybe
0-hour contracts and just picking up what you can. I think English teaching, of all the teaching, has been one of the main areas that have gone into that gig economy type thing, and I can't see it getting much better with the growth of online, with a big projected growth of online teaching. If that happens, I think that gig economy thing will just keep going.
Yeah, although I've heard some teachers say that actually having the online classes gives them more regularity, because if you're working for a large operation online, you just say, well, these are the hours when I can do the classes, and they've got enough teachers who are covering 24 hours, because there are teachers all around the globe doing it.
That's true.
So this particular teacher was actually able to escape from an irregular timetable by blocking time online. So who knows?
Who knows? Imagine some Uber drivers could also make the same thing. I'm not saying that blatantly. I think it's probably true that, it all depends on demand as well. So if there's a big enough demand, the gigs will not stop coming. So I think you mentioned something earlier, which is interesting. I wanted to, you said that what happens in the English language classroom could also be considered irregular. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so I think that especially maybe with adult students who've been used to being taught a particular way, or if you're teaching at a private language school and your students in mainstream school are taught a different way, so things like calling your teacher by their first name, even, that could be considered irregular. Making a lot of noise, moving around in the class,
moving the chairs around, comparing your answers with somebody else.
Exactly. Marking your own homework, or just even when you go into a classroom that's been set out possibly in the regular fashion of rows, and you come in and we tend to move the furniture, don't we, and make a horseshoe or make groups and whatever, and then so also then we have to put it back to normal, as it were, so that we've done something that wasn't normal, and then we put it back again, which has obviously got its pros and cons.
No, that's definitely true. And I think, yes, I always love that we say, let's put the classroom back to normal now. So, I never say it at the beginning. When I go to classes full of rows, I'm like, okay, can you put them into groups of 4, or put them into our circle? And then it's like, okay, before we go, just put everything back to normal.
We never say, can we just put everything in abnormal mode now, please?
Yes, exactly. Wow. I think that we've nailed most of this. I think we can probably agree that everything about English language teaching is irregular.
We've gone far and wide with irregular.
As always, if you were listening to this and had a suggestion or had something you'd like to add to the show, you can find us at TEFLcommute.com. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the regular social media places. I guess that means Facebook, Twitter, and all the podcasting places. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get podcasts, and now stream us on Spotify. Ceri, it was great to host again with you.
It was great fun being here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that's it from us, everyone. We'll be back again with another episode of the TEFL Commute soon.
As your commute is coming to an end, here's an activity you can take into class. Write irregular verbs up on the board. Begin by doing some quick review of irregular verbs. Then ask the class what their experience has been with this most common of English grammar points. Every student has, at some point, had to learn these verbs. Put students in pairs and ask them to brainstorm activities or techniques they've used to learn the list. Then do feedback as a whole class. If there's time, do one of the favourite activities the students suggest. These can also provide you with ideas for future classes when teaching this grammar point. You've been listening to the TEFL Commute, an original podcast produced and presented by Lindsay Clanfield, Shaun Wilden and James Taylor. Don't miss out on any episodes by subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or your podcast player of choice, and by visiting us at teflcommute.com.